Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to first of two workshops organized by the CFA Sri Lanka Society on speed reading and memory training. Today will be our first workshop, and the other one will be on Thursday. So, welcome, and you're free to join for both sessions, and we invite you to do that. Before we get started, one housekeeping announcement: please keep your audio on mute at all times until we get to questions. And there is also a chat box within this call. You can put your questions in there, and Paul will be happy to answer those as we go along. If I can just quickly introduce Paul. Paul Noack is the founder and CEO of IRIS, the largest and most trusted provider of speed reading and memory training. He's been a guest speaker at universities that include Harvard, Stanford, Berkeley, and NUS. His programs have taught worldwide to over 1 million students, executives, and lifelong learners, including at companies such as NASA, Google, GIC, and Fidelity Investments, and also many Fortune 500 companies. I'm sure it's an area that we are all looking forward to, because it's something that we can use in for those of us who are students in our learning, and also as executives, because there's so much thrown at us. How do you read fast, and how can you improve your memory while doing that? So with that said, I will hand it over to Paul. Paul, over to you.
Thank you very much, Daishan. Thank you all for joining us, and for all the organizers that got this together. And thank you for introducing me. We are going to cover, obviously, two sessions, and today we'll focus more on reading faster and improving comprehension. And on Thursday, we are going to focus much more heavily on memory. How do you memorize information? And of course, when we do this at the corporate level, but we also, of course, do this for students. We'll be talking a little more from the standpoint of the business professional experience. And I realize this is for the CFA Society. We have done a lot of work with CFA societies. We've done around 50 so far in mostly in the US. I'm broadcasting from Chicago. We do a lot of these workshops. Of course, before the pandemic, we were doing these workshops in various cities. All of our work now is, of course, online. We've been doing webinars for many, many years. So I want you all to know that this presentation is being recorded. So if you have any kind of connectivity issues, which sometimes happens, you will be receiving a recording. I will also make sure that I email all the organizers the entire slide deck as a PDF, so you have that for reference. And as we go along, feel free to submit any questions in the chat box. I will try to get to questions as I see them, but we'll really have a Q&A session at the end. So if I don't get to your question right away, just be aware that I will probably save it for later on. Sometimes we have many participants in these webinars. I think the largest webinar I've done in the past was like 5,000 attendees. So we would get a lot of questions. I don't anticipate a ridiculous amount of questions, but if you do have questions, you're more than welcome to ask them in the chat. Just be aware I might save them towards the end of the presentation. I mentioned here that we've got some handouts for today's session. And even if you do not have to have these printed. If you print them, great, but you don't have to. You can also just download them. As you can see, the links are pretty much the same: files.irisreading.com/speedtest1.pdf, and the same link, speedtest2.pdf. You do not have to have these downloaded, because I will display them on my screen, nice and large. We are going to measure your reading speed in a few moments. So that means if you're joining us here and you see my screen, please make sure that you expand your screen fully, so that later when I show my screen, you can actually see the entire article and read it. We're going to measure your reading speed, and you'll find out where you are. And our goal today is to actually make improvements. Here's what we're going to cover. So I mentioned you're going to start off finding out your reading speed. We'll talk about the averages. We'll also talk about how to improve your focus. So this is another challenge when we're reading. I think we've all had that scenario. You ever have this where you read a whole page of text and then you look up like, what did I just read? And we've all had this scenario where our mind just drifts off and wanders off. We're going to talk about improving focus, because if we can improve our concentration while reading, then we will definitely be able to read a little faster, but also improve our comprehension. We're also going to talk about different strategies for improving comprehension and how to read faster on the computer screen. It's one thing to read on the printed page, but I don't know about you, I'm probably doing maybe 80% of my reading, maybe 90% of my reading off of digital screens, my laptop, my tablet, my phone. And sometimes I'm reading an actual physical book, but most of the time it's off the screen. So this is a different challenge. Most people tend to read a little slower on the computer screen. So we'll talk about how to speed this up and also how to build up your speed with practice. Reading is a skill just like anything else. If you've played any kind of sport, I grew up playing basketball, but whether it's a sport or an instrument, you can practice to get better at anything, just like with reading. And we'll talk about how we can actually practice. We'll do some practice exercises in this webinar as well. Now, our focus in terms of what we want to cover today and also on Thursday, when we do our next webinar, is speed. We want to read faster. We also want to comprehend the material. And there's a third area of reading, and there's a third area is related to comprehension, but it's retention. And retention is what you remember, obviously. So I want to make this subtle distinction between the two, because comprehension is what are you understanding the moment you're actually reading it. So think of it like real time. And retention is, of course, what do you remember later on? Sometimes you could read something and understand it very well, but then later you forget information. And we've all had this scenario where we just can't remember what we've read. Quick background, just so you know, I mentioned we worked with a lot of CFA societies. My background previously is in finance. I used to work in the futures and options trading industry. I was born and raised here in Chicago. I actually used to work at the Chicago Board of Trade, where years ago they would have these trading pits, everyone yelling their heads off. And I worked in a variety of markets, from obviously equities, bonds, different commodity markets, currencies. And my older brother actually happens to be a CFA member as well. I know that's a very, very difficult test to get through. So we've got a lot of experience. I do not have a CFA myself, but I do have probably around like 10 years of experience working in the futures and options trading industry. The way I got involved doing this, just a very, very quick background, I learned speed reading techniques from a professor that I had when I was in college. It was my freshman year of college, and like many college students, I was falling behind in my reading very quickly. And I was a good student in high school, but when you get to college, everyone was a good student previously. So, but I couldn't keep up with my reading, and I had a professor I was meeting with and kind of complaining to that there's not enough time in the day to get all this reading done. And my professor suggested to me that I take a speed reading course. He told me he took a speed reading course when he was in college. And at the time, when I was looking for a speed reading course, I couldn't find any in Chicago. So I found some books on speed reading. I found some software on speed reading, but I wanted to take an actual class with a teacher, and I couldn't find any classes at that time. So I went back to my professor and basically asked him, can you teach me what you know about speed reading? And he allowed me to come in during his office hours. And just to give you an idea of like a time frame and how much improvement I made, when I started out, when he measured my reading speed, I was at 190 words per minute. Now, 190 words per minute is around average. I was relieved to know that I was average, because for the longest throughout my life, I thought I was a slow reader. Some of you might be surprised when you find out your reading speed in a few moments when we test it. Because some people come in and they think, oh, I think I'm a slow reader, and they find out they're average. Some of you are going to find out maybe you're above average. But I was around average. I thought I was a slow reader because English is not my first language. Both of my parents are immigrants from Poland, and I grew up speaking only Polish. I didn't start speaking English until like 5 or 6 years old. So I always thought reading, I was always more mathematically inclined. So I thought maybe because English is not my first language, maybe that's why I'm reading a little more slowly. But I found out I was average, 190 words per minute. He also gave me a standardized reading test. Do not worry, we are not going to do a standardized reading test right now. We don't have time for it. But I scored a 60% on this test because I basically ran out of time. So I start training with my professor. I'd come in on Tuesdays and Thursdays for like about an hour, hour and a half at a time. And I went through about 10 hours of total training over a few weeks. My last session with my professor, I started off at 190. My last session, I was at 830. So about 4 times faster, a little over 4 times faster. And as far as comprehension goes, when he gave me the standardized reading test, the second time around, instead of a 60%, I scored a 83% because it was easier to get through the test. Now, I hate to sound cliche and call this a life-changing experience, but if you're reading 4 times faster, that changes a lot of things for you. First thing I was wondering was, why didn't I learn this earlier? Because I would have done better on my tests back in school. First of all, better late than never, but this helped me getting through college. I was working while I was going to school, and the way I started this organization, Iris, is my final semester in college, I took an entrepreneurship class. And by the way, I was a finance major, but this was just like an elective. And I took an entrepreneurship class and we had to come up with a business idea. And this was basically the business idea. I had a lot of friends that were asking me, like, how are you working full time while going to school full time? And I would tell them that I learned speed reading techniques. And I noticed that whenever I would mention anything about speed reading, people would ask me, like, so how does that work? How do you actually maintain comprehension? And I started this off as a business plan within an entrepreneurship class. And it started growing little by little. I was working in finance the whole time for a number of years. As we started to grow more and more, that's when I eventually quit working in finance and I started working on this full time. We have a number of employees. All of them are working remotely now, but we've done these workshops now in well over 100 cities throughout the world, mostly in the US, but we've done workshops. We do a lot of workshops in Singapore. We have an instructor in Hong Kong. We've done workshops all over the place. So thank you all. I just wanted to give you a quick idea how I got involved doing this. And let's think about how most people tend to read, because we've got to change how we read if we're going to start reading faster. Not completely, but we've got to make some changes to old habits. Here's how most people read. You see this green dot that's bouncing around on the screen. Most people, when they read, they go word by word. And of course, you ever do this where you're like, hold on. I didn't catch that. Let me back up. Go back and really, okay, let me read that one more time. Okay, now there are basically 3 old reading habits that we need to change if we're going to start reading faster. And one of these old habits is called fixation. Fixation is something your eyes do when you're reading. They fixate on a word by word basis. Now the problem here is you don't have to read word by word. When you get enough fluency in any language, whether it's English or some other language, instead of going word by word, you can start reading multiple words at a time. Now, there are still some limits here, of course, but instead of going one by one, you can read 2, 3, 4, even 4 words at a time with your peripheral vision. You would actually notice this when you're just walking around town, or if you're driving. When you see street signs or advertisements, you will look at the sign and you will grab the 3, 4 words in one single fixation. But when we read on the printed page, most people go back to reading, like you see here, word by word. So we have to get out of this habit of going word by word and start grouping words. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about changing this other habit, which we've touched on, and that is regression. Regression is going back to reread something, and we've all done this. We read something and we're like, I don't know what I just read. Let me read that again. Or sometimes you ever have this where you've been reading for a while and you're going line by line, but your mind is drifting off and you don't notice it initially. But after a page or two, you realize, wait, nothing is sinking in. I've been thinking about something totally different. I need to go back. So researchers actually have a name for this. It's not really a fancy name. They call it mindless reading. Mindless reading is when you're reading and you're actually going word by word, line by line, page by page, but then you realize your mind was drifting off the entire time. So we need to improve our concentration so we don't go back as often. But I do want to give you a quick tip related to this. We've all had the scenario where you read a sentence and it didn't make sense, so you read it again. You ever have it where you read the same sentence multiple times and for some reason it's just not making sense? What I would suggest here, the problem is you should never go back to reread after one sentence. And let me explain why. If you read that one sentence and it didn't make sense, there are a few potential reasons why you didn't understand it. One, maybe you were not paying attention. That's possible. Two, maybe it's not clearly written. And that happens sometimes, even if it's published material, sometimes the material is not, clearly written. Or if you do a lot of email reading, you may notice that sometimes people don't write emails well. I just got an email earlier today, and it was just one big chunk of text. The person decided, I'm not going to create any paragraphs here and make this as hard as possible to read. But there's a third possibility. When you're reading something, isn't it true that sometimes you could read this sentence and it doesn't make sense until you read the next sentence or the rest of the paragraph? And that happens very often. So what I'm trying to emphasize here is you should never go back after one sentence. Try to finish a whole paragraph first. If you finish a whole paragraph and then you realize that didn't make sense or I didn't understand it, then of course we should go back if we read a whole paragraph. But try to avoid doing it after one sentence. It kind of reminds me of, when we watch movies. Have you ever watched a movie and at the beginning, it doesn't make any sense, right? First 5 minutes of the movie, you don't really understand what's going on. Do you stop the movie and say, let's rewatch the beginning. Let's go back and not reread, but rewatch. You wouldn't do that, right? Because in movies, you know how it is. Usually when a movie starts off and the beginning is confusing, later on in the movie, you'll figure out what was happening at the beginning. Or maybe at the end, it explains what happened at the beginning. So just keep in mind when we're reading, sometimes the same thing happens. You have to read beyond one sentence. But the bigger problem here with regression is people having trouble concentrating. So we'll talk about how to improve concentration. And there's a third habit. This habit right here, subvocalization. Remember when you were first learning how to read, your teacher had you get up in front of class and you had to read out loud. And I don't know if you remember this dreadful experience. I do, because I used to hate reading out loud in front of class because it's sort of like public speaking, but also I mentioned to all of you earlier, English is not my first language, it's Polish. So when I was first learning English around the age of 6 or 7 years old, I used to always mess up on words because I was just learning the language. So I used to hate reading out loud. The good news is you don't have to read out loud forever. Eventually your teacher tells you, don't say the words out loud, but instead say the words in your head. And this is known as subvocalization. You are subvocalizing the words. You may have noticed when you're reading, there's like this little voice in your head and you're saying the words. Have you noticed that you're hearing voices in your head? And it doesn't mean you're crazy if you're hearing voices. It's your voice, right? It doesn't mean you're crazy. By the way, if you're hearing other voices in your head that are not your own voice, if you're hearing other voices, you might be in the wrong session today. But this habit is common among all readers, saying the words in your head. The problem with this habit, and the reason why we have to change it and why we're calling it an old reading habit, we have to change this because if you say all the words in your head, what does that mean? That means you will basically read as fast as you talk. And that's a problem because we can only talk so fast, right? Now, we're going to work on changing these habits. Before we start changing these habits and doing exercises, I want to start by measuring your reading speed. So let's find out, how fast do you read? I want you to refer to this handout. Don't start reading it yet. We're all going to start reading in a few moments here. And what I'm going to have you do is just read the way you normally would. Don't go faster than usual. Don't go slower than usual. What you'll notice, by the way, if you don't have this file, don't worry. I will show it on my screen. You see the next slide here? I'm going to have it on the screen. I'm going to take it away for a moment. So just because when we start the timer, we're going to read for 1 minute. And I just want you to find out what your current reading speed is. To make sure that you're not fully distracted, I'm going to disable my webcam for now. Goodbye. I'll enable it again later on. I will also, while you're reading, I will turn off I'll just mute my microphone while you're reading, just to make sure you don't have background noise. But I just want you to read the way you normally would. On the next slide, I will have this PDF on the screen. So if you are just going to read from the screen here, make sure that you have expanded and maximized your window on whatever computer or digital device you happen to be on. Of course, if you are viewing this webinar on a mobile device, this might be a little hard, which is why we're giving you the entire file here where you can find this. But while you're reading, you will notice a bunch of numbers on the side. You see all these numbers over here? That will just help you figure out your reading speed. So, like I said, make sure you're ready to read. In a few seconds, I'm going to start the timer. When I start the timer, I will go to the next slide so you can see the PDF. But of course, you can have this printed and read it from there. But I want you to read for just 1 minute the way you normally would. Don't go faster than usual. Don't go slower than usual. You want to find out your actual reading speed. So everyone should be ready. Go ahead and begin reading. And stop. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is look at the line where you stopped reading. And I would like you to figure out what your reading speed was. So, if you finish the first two paragraphs, you see it says 250 over here. That would be 250 words from the beginning here, from the first line, all the way to the end. So 250 words per minute. We only read for 1 minute. What I'd like all of you to do, just to make this webinar a little more interactive, if you could in the group chat, if you want, I'll leave this up to you. You don't have to, but type what your reading speed was. If you want to add it here, I mentioned to all of you earlier when I first started measuring my speed, I was at 190 words per minute. So feel free if you'd like. You don't have to. By the way, you could send this as a private message to me, or you could send it as a message to everyone, just so we can see what are some of the numbers here. And we're going to have some people that are average, above average, below average. This is not to put anybody on the spot. This is merely, think of it like an experiment or a little test of our speed. Don't worry, we're not going to broadcast this to the world here. So thank you for, I see a lot of numbers coming through. Thank you, all of you, for this also lets me know that people actually can hear me, and I'm not just talking into the void of the internet. So I'm sure some of you are wondering, am I average, above average? Let me give you an idea. Here's the average. 150 to 250 is the average reading speed. Now, I want you to know this is just a generic average. When I say generic, I mean, it's for adults. It does not take into account education level. Now, for college educated adults, this average is a little bit higher. The average reading speed for college-educated adults is 250 to 350. So it's a little bit higher, but that's where most people tend to fall. Now, remember I talked to you about this, this habit, subvocalization. Now, subvocalization, that voice in your head, if you found yourself reading 200 some words per minute or even 300 words per minute, that habit of subvocalization might be holding you back from making improvements. So this is always a habit that needs to change if we are going to start reading faster. Because if I'm saying all the words in my head, then I will only read as fast as I talk. Actually, when we used to do these workshops in person, we'll, when this whole pandemic is over, we will go back to doing workshops in person. But when we were doing them previously, I used to like doing a little exercise related to subvocalization. And here's the exercise. You can try this out on your own later on, but I would have everyone in the room read for 1 minute in their own reading material, 1 minute. And then by the way, I'd have them read out loud. And it's total chaos because everyone's reading different books and everyone's reading out loud. It's kind of distracting. But then we would measure everyone's talking speed. So how fast did you read out loud? And guess what happens? The average person ends up reading or talking 150 to 250. That's where most people fall. You might want to try this later on. I'm not going to have everyone do it right now because reading out loud, you can do that on your own. But if you try this, last time I did it, I was like 221 words per minute talking. That's because I can only talk so fast. Now, I could talk really, really fast if I tried. I could go back to this article here and go, okay, we live in curious times, and just ramble off words very, very quickly. But if I tried doing that, I'd probably get somewhere maybe over here. If I talked really fast, maybe I could get to here, 300. But there is a limit to how fast you can talk. What about not your talking speed? What about your thinking speed? I am 100% sure you can think much faster than you can talk. And this is exactly why we have to change this habit of subvocalization. Now, the average reading speed and the average talking speed are the same. It's because of that habit. Let's talk about how we start making improvements. So first, we want to improve our concentration. When we're reading, it's easy to get distracted, especially, with all of us and our digital devices. It's very easy to, maybe you're reading on the page and then halfway through the page, you get a text message or some other distraction. Maybe if you're reading on the screen, something pops up. We have all these distractions. And the simplest way you can improve your concentration while reading is if you have printed material, something like an actual book, it's to use your hand or pen as a guide. So when I say that, what I mean really is while you're reading, either going like this. Now I'm doing it on the side here. Realistically, I would be using either my hand or my finger to read, or some people prefer to use a pen. That's fine too. But you're using your pen, your hand, or your finger as a guide. Why is this helpful? It's because your eyes are naturally attracted to motion. Anything that moves around gets our attention. So if you create some motion on the page, then you are more likely to pay attention, because that's just how we're wired as human beings. We pay attention to things that are moving around. Let me give you an example. If there was a bee flying around in your room right now, a bee, it would be a little distracting, right? Or any other kind of bug or insect. It would be distracting, one, because it's a bee, and two, because it's moving around. And anytime you have movements, it basically, I don't want to say it distracts us, we can use movements to our advantage. Like when we're reading, we can create some motion on the page. And if you use your finger or your hand, or if you prefer a pen as a guide, you will naturally pay more attention. And as a result, you'll have better concentration. Now, I realize using your hand or pen is not very practical if you're reading on a digital device, right? If you've got your phone, you're not going to be going like this on your phone. It's not very practical. Or on the screen, nobody's going to be dragging their finger across the screen like this. So let's talk about reading on the screen. This is a different challenge. Remember the average reading speed I showed you earlier? Well, the average reading speed is a little bit slower on the screen. I did see a research study that was done on this a few years ago. And in this particular study, they found the average person was reading 32% slower on the screen compared to printed material. 32% slower. So if the average person is around 200 words per minute, maybe their average speed on the computer screen is closer to like 140, 150. Let's talk about reading on the screen. So I will, let me share my browser here. Here's our website, by the way. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to pull up some very technical material from The Onion. Okay, it's not that technical, but if you're not familiar with The Onion, you're in for a treat. This is a satirical website. So all the news here is, it's all fake news, as they would say. But this is just, it has a bunch of funny articles. So we have here, world scientists admit they just don't like mice. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to show you how you can read this faster. And the way we will do it is by using an application that we developed. Now, let me turn off my webcam for a moment here because I'm going to have you read. Here's the application. If you go to accelerator.com, you see right here, accelerator.com, that's where you can find this tool. This is a free speed reading tool that we developed, and it helps you read faster. So I want to show you how it works. Basically what you do, you see the text here? You just got to copy and paste. This is just a text box. You copy and paste whatever you want to read into the box. So in this case, I've just copied the text from here. And then you click the begin button. Now, when I click read, I want you to pay attention right here. I want you to focus in the center of the screen. And what you're going to do is you're going to be reading. When I click read, you'll notice the words are going to be blinking on the screen at whatever speed you set in the settings. Now, the default for this program is 300 words per minute. But you can change that in the settings. If you click settings, you can change your speed right over here to whatever you want. We're going to go 300 words per minute just to kind of test it out. And we're going to read through this article right here. It's a very short article, but I just want to demonstrate this for you. So we're going to read world scientists admit they just don't like mice. Let's see how it works. Let's see if you can keep up at 300 words per minute. By the way, I should mention here, since we are doing a webinar, and you know, everyone's internet connection, sometimes your internet connection slows down or speeds up. If this looks very jumpy, it's because of the internet connection and because we're doing a webinar. I think for most of you, it should just stream fine. But I can guarantee you when you do this on your own screen, it'll be just fine. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to click I'll mute my microphone. We'll click read, and you're going to read through this article. World scientists admit they just don't like mice. Let's try it out. Okay, all right. So I think you get the idea of how this program works. And there are various things you can tweak here. For example, you can try going faster. You can also change the number of words. Did you notice it was blinking 2 words at a time? Like if we went back to the beginning here, you'll notice it was going 2 at a time. You can change that in the settings. So you can actually, you see where it says chunk size? You can change it to whatever you want. So it was at 2. You can go 1, you can do 3, 4. If you're wondering what I would recommend starting with 2 or 3. Some of you might feel comfortable even with like 4 or 5. There is a point where it's sort of like this law of diminishing returns. It's great we have peripheral vision, but that doesn't mean we can just read 20 words in one single glance. So we can do 2, 3, 4. You'll start tapering off around 6 or 7. That's where you need multiple fixations to gather the words. Sort of like if you went to a movie theater, if you sat in the front row of a movie theater, you can't see the whole screen. You'd have to be moving your head. If we have too many words, it's going to get outside of your peripheral vision. Not really outside of your peripheral vision, but when you have peripheral vision, most of the detail you see, I can see wall to wall here where I'm at. But if you gave me a sign, I'd be able to read it if it was directly in front of me. If it was off to the side here, I probably wouldn't be able to make out the details unless I moved my head. So change this to whatever you want. You can change the font size. I do want to show you what it looks like a little faster. Let's see if you can keep up at 350 words per minute. For this, we'll do a different article. So let's say we had to read this article. CIA realizes it's been using black highlighters all these years. Okay, so let's say to read this ridiculous article. We copy and paste the text, like we've already done here, and then we click begin. Watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to change this right here to 350. By the way, I'm just going to hit, there are some keyboard shortcuts here, as you can see. So I'm going to use the up, let me zoom in so you can see. You can use the up and down arrow keys to increase or decrease your speed. And there's other things like, space is kind of like your play and pause button. But let's try going to 350. Let me change this to 350. As you can see here, 350. Let's see if we can still keep up at 350, but we'll do a different article here. CIA realizes it's been using black highlighters all these years. Let's try it out. I'm going to disable my webcam and mute my microphone. Let's try it out. By the way, I'm just pausing it for a moment because I want to mention one more thing. These are relatively short articles. If you were reading a very long PDF that was like 30, 40 pages long, you can paste all the text in there, but I would recommend going section by section. When you're reading for a very long period of time, especially using a program like this, I wouldn't read for an excessive amount of time. How much does that mean? Well, if I was reading something that was more than 30 pages, I would paste a section of text, maybe the first 2 or 3 pages, and I would read through it. And then I would maybe take some notes. And then I would do the next section, copy and paste into the program, and then take some notes. By the way, note taking helps you to remember things. We'll get into more detail on remembering information and memorizing information in the next webinar. But let's just finish up this article. So, by the way, you see you can use the arrow keys here. The left arrow key to go back or skip ahead. I'm going to go back just a few sentences, not a few sentences. I'll go back like one sentence. But you see here, we can just use the arrow keys to go. So I'm going to continue here. Let's just finish the article. It's a pretty short article. Here we go. Okay, so I think all of you get the idea. If you were able to keep up, that was 350 words per minute. That is probably double or more what the typical person would go on the computer screen. Remember, I told you there was a study where they looked at the average reader on the computer screen versus on the page, and they found in this particular study it was 32% slower on the screen. So this can help you read a little faster. Part of the reason is you can read groups of words with this program, as you saw here, 2 words at a time. But you can also basically pace yourself. Instead of looking all over on the screen, you're just looking in a central area, and that helps you concentrate a little better. By the way, we are working on turning this into an iPhone and Android application. We'll keep you posted, or you could always go back here to Accelerator when we have that available. Should be available in the next month or two. So other settings you can check out on your own, but I want to make sure that you know one thing to avoid. I would avoid going 1 word at a time. Let me explain why. What if we tried going faster? Let's say 400 words per minute. Let's try it. Settings, 400. But we're going to do 1 word at a time. You see here, chunk size, 1. Here's what that looks like. Now, you might be able to keep up with it, but you have to avoid blinking. And that's a problem. You want to keep your eyes moisturized. So I wouldn't go 1 word at a time. What you can do, if you set the settings to 2 words at a time or more, think about it. I'm not going to change the speed here, but you'll notice it's easier to read going 2 words at a time. Even though this is a fast speed, if you go 2 words at a time, think about the speed here. There's actually 2 speeds. There is a reading speed, words per minute, but isn't there also a blinking speed, which is determined by the chunk size, right? So if you went 1 word at a time, you just saw what that was. That was pretty fast, right? You blink words very, very quickly. But if you do 2 words at a time, how fast is it going to blink? It's going to blink half as fast, right? That actually makes it more manageable. Watch. You see how that's a little more manageable? Of course, if we change this to 3 words at a time, it would be even slower as far as blinking. But the speed is the same. It's still 400 words per minute. So here's 3 words at a time. You see how that's a little more manageable? So I'm just bringing that up so you know how to tweak this program and kind of optimize it for yourself. You can also use this as a training tool. So check that out when you get a chance. It's free. This is a program that we developed, accelerator.com. Now, I want to continue on because there are ways that we can improve our reading speed. How do you get better at anything? What do you have to do? Practice, right? We know that is how we make improvements in just about anything. Well, there's a way that you can go about practicing and improving your ability to read faster, comprehend better. One of the exercises that we're going to focus on right now is something we call a speed drill. So speed drills, the whole point of a speed drill is to purposely go faster than you would normally read. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to go through the same material you already read. Remember this article? Now, I only had you read this article for 1 minute. And, some of you, maybe you finished the first couple paragraphs. Some of you went further. Whatever your reading speed was, we're going to do a speed drill that is 40 seconds. And here's what I want you to do in 40 seconds. I want you to start back at the beginning of the article. And you have to get through all the material you already read. So let's say you read the first 3 paragraphs. I want you to get through the first 3 paragraphs in 40 seconds. Now, earlier, you read that in 60 seconds, but I want you to do it in 40. Now, it shouldn't be too hard because you already read this, right? What we're doing here is I want you to purposely go faster than you would normally read. Easiest way to start doing that is, well, let's read something, not really read, but I want you to skim over the text that you already read, okay? Now, again, this is the file name, by the way, of this article. This is the same article from earlier when I had you reading. But what I'm asking you to do is I want you to move your eyes faster. If you have this printed out, by the way, use your finger or your hand, or if you prefer, you can use a pen as a guide. I realize not everyone can do that because if you're just going from the screen here, if you don't have this printed, it's not very practical to use, your hand. So if you can't use your hand or pen as a guide, that's fine. But I want everyone to make sure that you're going faster than usual. And of course, that shouldn't be too hard because we already read this from the beginning, the first minute of this article. But I'm only going to give you 40 seconds. So I'm going to put 40 seconds on the clock here. And I will disable my webcam. Goodbye. I will re-enable it later. While you're doing this drill, I will also turn off my audio so you can focus. But you're just going to have 40 seconds. And all I want you to do is get through all the material that you previously read. When we read earlier, it was 60 seconds. I'm not going to give you 60 seconds. You're only going to have 40 seconds. And you have to get through what you read originally. Now, if you get through it in less than 40 seconds, you can just continue on to the rest of the material. But I want you to make sure you get through everything you already read. Okay, here we go. 40 seconds. Ready, set, and go. All right, that was 40 seconds. Did you make it to your line? I hope you did, because now our next drill is not going to be 40 seconds. I'm only going to give you now 35 seconds. We're going to do the same exact thing you just did, but I want you to move your eyes a little faster. I want you to go, I don't want to call this exactly reading. I was going to say, I want you to read faster. This doesn't really count as reading because we already read this, and I just want you to basically skim. You're not really reading here, you're skimming. I want you to skim through the material faster than you would normally read. Remember, that's the whole point of a speed drill. So think of this as just practice. This is a practice exercise. We are purposely going faster than usual. Start at the beginning and go a little bit faster than what you just did. You have to get through in 35 seconds. You have to get to the line that you originally read up to. Okay, when I say originally read up to, that was the minute of reading when we tested out your speed. So if you got up to here in a minute, you've got to get to the same place in 35 seconds. Okay, let's try it out. Ready, set, and go. That was 35 seconds. If you made it to your line, very good. Let's make it a little more challenging. 30 seconds now. Well, let's do it one more time on the same material we already read. Okay, same thing. Just go a little bit faster. You now have 30 seconds. Ready, set, and go. Okay, that is 30 seconds. If you made it, very good. We are going to actually change the drill slightly. And what I want you to do now is I want you to get through You're going to have 1:15 seconds. I want you to get from the beginning all the way to the end. So you see at the bottom here, there are this entire article, all the text you see on the screen. I want you to get through all of that text. Okay. By the way, I see I've got two screens that I can see the text on. There's actually, I'm going to move this a little bit higher just so you can see everything. I'll make this a little bigger here. The reason I'm doing that is I'm looking on my other computer and I notice there's a little bar that goes across the bottom of this Zoom webinar platform, and that was obstructing the view of the last line here. So start at the top. I want you to skim through all the text. Actually, there's a little bar at the top also that says you are viewing Paul Novak's screen. So you can't really see the top line either. So let's just make it a little smaller. I think you could probably see all of it now. And what you're going to do is just skim through all of this. Now, there's material for many of you. There's material here you have not yet read, right? Maybe you didn't finish this article when we read it for a minute earlier. I'm going to give you 1:15 seconds, and I want you to finish the entire article, even if that means your comprehension is not perfect. Think of this speed drill sort of like a skimming exercise. I want you to skim through all this text faster than you would normally read. Okay. Now, by the way, some of you, maybe if you were an above average reader and you already read all of this text in a minute, well, that would be 581 words per minute. I want you to go faster regardless. If you're average, above average, below average, everybody has to make it through all this text. Just skim through it. So don't worry if your comprehension is not perfect. This is a drill focused on speed. So we're temporarily prioritizing speed over comprehension. In a few moments, we will change our emphasis back to comprehension, but right now, just focus on speed. Skim through all this text, try to finish it in 1:15 seconds. When I say try, actually make yourself finish all of this, even if that means comprehension is terrible. Okay, you're just going to skim through text. You're going to notice you're going to be seeing the words very, very quickly. You're not going to understand it perfectly. That's okay. Now, you might understand like this first couple paragraphs, because we keep doing it over and over again. But I want you to focus on seeing the words faster. The logic behind this approach is once we get used to seeing words faster, then we could start working on how do we comprehend the material at those faster speeds. But first, we just want to get used to seeing words at a very rapid rate. So 1:15 seconds. Make sure you get through all the text that you see on your screen here. Ready, set, and go. All right, that was 1:15 seconds. Now, we are going to do one final drill on the same material, but it's only going to be a minute, and we're going to go through the same exact material here. So let me just paste what I had before. Okay, you have 1 minute, and you've got to get through all this text. Again, we're still doing a speed drill, so all I want you to do, when I say speed drill, I mean skim. Skim through the text. Go faster than you would normally read. We're going to do this one last time on the same text. Okay? Here we go. Ready, set, and go. All right, let me stop you there. If you got through all this text, very good. What we're going to do now is refer to another handout. So you see the new handout here, files.irisrating.com/speedtest2. That's the new document I want you to get through. By the way, I will have it on the screen here. You see it right here? We're going to read this particular piece of text. Now, let me modify this slightly. The title, How Distraction Hurts Creativity. What I want you to do is, I'm going to move this just a little bit higher because I noticed the last line gets cut off. So I want you to read. We're not going to do the drill anymore. So the drill, make a distinction between the drill and normal reading. So normal reading, that means, reading something normally for good comprehension. That's what I want you to do here, read. Earlier, I was asking you to skim or do a speed drill. So don't go too fast, and of course, don't go too slow either. By the way, I see the last line is still being a little bit obstructed, so if you guys don't mind, I'm just going to shrink this slightly so I can see it on the other computer. I think that, yep, that shows the entire article. There are 492 words in this article. Similar topic, same author, by the way. This is actually an extract. This is a passage from the same book. It's a book related to how to improve your focus. I want you to read. So don't go too fast. Don't go too slow. Just go at whatever speed feels comfortable. And I'll stop you in 1 minute. Okay? Ready, set, and go. Okay, let me stop you there. Look at the line where you stopped and figure out what your speed was. And I'm curious to know. Think about what you read at the very beginning of the webinar. You had a certain speed. Did you read a little faster this time? So if you read a little faster, you can type a yes in the chat box. I'm just curious to know. It's not uncommon. Sometimes people will make their first improvement. So again, type a yes in the chat box if you happen to be reading a little faster this time, okay? And by the way, even if you did not read faster, I don't want you to get, I see a lot of people typing yes here, but even if you did not read faster, we only did a few drills. I want you to understand how you can do these drills on your own because, very good, I see a lot of you made improvements there. That's the reason for this next slide here, the success baby. I just noticed this kid has some sand on his lip. He's like been eating the sand or something. Okay, if you read faster, very good. But we only started out doing a few drills. Let me explain how these drills work. And I'm also going to show you later how you can do these drills on your own to continue making more improvements. So I like to compare these drills to driving on a highway. Now, I'm broadcasting from Chicago, and it's a pretty big city here in the US. It doesn't look anything like this as far as a highway. This is like a highway in a very rural area. But when you're on the highway, if you were driving, think about it. How fast would you drive? Well, you go at a certain speed, faster than usual, right? If you're driving around a big city, you don't drive that fast, right? Because there's people, there's other cars. So you're constantly changing up your speed. So normally when we're reading, when we're on the highway, we're going faster than usual. How does it feel when you get off the highway? Doesn't it feel kind of slow? Now, why does it feel slow? It feels slow when you get off the highway because you got used to going pretty fast when you were on the highway. So they actually have a name for that experience. They call it velocitization. And it's just the idea of like, you're going fast and then you drop it down, but sometimes you're still going faster than you would normally go. Now, when you're reading, when you're doing these speed drills, it's like being on the highway, so to speak. You're going faster than your normal reading rate. But then you get off the highway, you stop doing these drills and you go back to normal reading like we did here. And what a lot of people notice is, all right, maybe I was going, earlier when I was doing these speed drills, I was going 581 words per minute, just skimming. But then you go back to normal reading and you notice, oh, I'm now going a little bit faster than I would normally read. These drills can help you make more and more improvements. But I want you to also know that this is just like just one aspect of improving our reading abilities. What about comprehension? Let's talk about how we can improve comprehension. There's a simple thing you can do to enhance your understanding and comprehension of the material, and that is to change up your reading speed. Sometimes you slow down, sometimes you speed up, just like if we were driving, right? If you're making a turn, if you're driving a car and you make a turn like this, you're probably going to slow down, right? So you don't fly off the road. So how do we slow down and speed up? A good rule of thumb to follow. Let me just give you an example here. So we have a sample article here called, this is from the New Yorker magazine, India's Skills Famine, okay? So if you were reading something like this, or really anything else for that matter, where do we slow down and when should we speed up? A good rule of thumb to follow is to slow down on the first sentence of a paragraph. And after the first sentence, speed up. First sentence, slow down here, speed up here. Slow down here, speed up here. When I say slow down, I don't mean extremely slow. And I also don't mean, when I say speed up, I don't mean you should speed up and skim through all of this right here. I just mean a little bit faster, a little bit slower here, a little bit faster here, a little bit slower and faster. Why does this work? It's because when you're changing up your reading speed, you basically trick yourself into paying attention. So let me zoom in on this paragraph so you can see. So let's say we were reading this article, India's Skills Famine. Here's the first paragraph. It reads, "The economic transformation of India is one of the great business stories of our time." Sounds like a main idea, right? We take that idea and now we're going a little bit faster through the rest of the text. When you get to the next paragraph, we slow it down. Look at this first sentence. But India has run into a surprising hitch on its way to superpower status. Its inexhaustible supply of workers is becoming exhausted. Okay. Now, you probably already know why we're slowing down in the first sentence, right? First sentences tend to be main ideas. Some people would call them main ideas. Some people call these the topic sentences. Some people call them introductions. However you want to call it, we know that the first sentence usually, when things are well written, usually the first sentence gives you the main point. And then we get details, right? Look at the third paragraph. How is this possible in a country that every year produces 2.5 million college graduates and 400,000 engineers? Now we get our detail. So we're slowing down here, speeding up. Next paragraph. There was a time when many economists believed that post-secondary education didn't have much impact on economic growth. Apologies, sorry about that. So you see how first sentences give you these main points. Now, when we get to the next paragraph, the irony of the current situation is that India was once considered to be overeducated, which is interesting. How could a country be overeducated? That's just doesn't make sense. Look at the next paragraph here. Since the Second World War, the countries that have made successful leaps from developing to developed status have all poured money, public and private, into education. And the last paragraph, India has taken tentative steps to remedy its skills famine. The current government has made noises about doubling education, and a host of new colleges and universities have sprung up since the mid-1990s. Do you see how all these first sentences give us the main points? Now, if you're changing up your speed, this is a good rule of thumb. First sentence of a paragraph, you slow down, and then you speed up. Changing up your speed helps improve your comprehension. Now, if you were to read this article now, you would probably read it faster, right? Because you know what to expect, right? This is another strategy that is very, very important. If you're going to start making improvements, if you want to read faster, if you want to comprehend more, it's not only about slowing down and speeding up, like changing speed. If you were going to actually read this article, what you should do, you should read the first sentence of each paragraph first. So for example, I read all these first sentences already out loud to you about this title, India's Skills Famine. You already know a little bit about this article, don't you? You know it's about India, obviously, from the title, but you also know they're talking about the economy, they're talking about a shortage of skilled labor, they're talking about education. You get these main themes very easily by reading the first sentence of each paragraph. And this is a very important speed reading strategy. Probably one of the bigger takeaways from today's webinar is that you should inspect what you read. Before you read anything, you should get familiar with what you're about to read. So it's very important that before you read anything, you just kind of, like if I was reading a chapter in a book, I'm just flipping through and maybe I read first sentence of each paragraph like you see here. But you can also read, if you're reading something more complex, what do you read? Well, you would read maybe the introduction, the headings and subheadings. I would recommend reading the words that are in bold or italics, any titles of charts, tables, diagrams. And if we read the introduction, we should also read the conclusion, but this is just step number one. So here's the problem. When most people read, what do? They have a brand new book, they turn to page number 1 of chapter 1, and they just start reading page by page, slowly but surely getting through this long chapter. Now, this material doesn't really have long chapters, but if I was reading some PDF, some research report, for example, I know when I was working in finance, you used to sometimes evaluate a company. You might have to value and figure out, you're reading different research reports, you're reading 10Ks, annual reports, things like that. Most people just start on the first page. It's better to flip through, or if I had the PDF, I'd be scrolling through and I would be reading key parts of that report first. That's what inspecting has to do. It's really just getting familiar with the material. It's kind of like, it reminds me of before you exercise or play a sport, what do? Before people exercise, they tend to warm up or stretch out, right? to get your body ready for the physical activity. What should we do when we're reading? Well, we should think of it like the reading equivalent of stretching out, warming up. It's for your brain. It's really to get your brain familiar with, what am I getting myself into? Instead of just starting on page 1, I should be flipping through and looking through all this text, looking at boldface words, headings, subheadings, things like that. Now, if you don't have any headings and subheadings, like right here, well, then I'm just going to read the first sentence of each paragraph because I know those are the main points. But if you did have something longer that was a little more structured, like you see here, read the introduction, read the headings and subheadings. All of this gets you familiar with the material before you start reading it. And then, of course, you read it. So step 1 is inspect, get familiar. Step 2 is read it. Now, what do we do when we're done reading? When we're done reading, well, then it's a good idea to, when I get to the end of this chapter, the third step, and most people don't do this, they just continue reading to the next chapter, or when they're done reading, they're just done. After you're done reading your text, you should inquire. When I say inquire, I mean just ask questions. Inquire about what you just read. Questions help focus the mind. So when I finish reading something, if I was reading a business book, maybe it's to help me improve the way in which I'm running my business. I would be finishing what I've read, and then I would ask myself questions. Okay, what are the biggest takeaways from what I just read? Are there any action items? So what I just read, is there anything that's actionable here? That's what I like to ask when I'm reading something related to anything that would be related to my business. I would ask, okay, what can I take from what I just learned? And how can I put that in action? Sometimes that means adding something to my task list or delegating something to someone else on my team. But if you were reading this just for information, you might ask, okay, what were the biggest points? Do I need to memorize anything? And that leads us to our next step here, store. If I need to memorize something, how am I going to store that information? Now, I want you to know that we'll focus mainly on this part in the next webinar. When I say store, I mean, what if you have to memorize something? Or maybe not memorize, but you really want to have this in your head. You want to know it inside out. That will be the focus of our next webinar. By the way, we call this, this process here is for, especially when you're reading something very, very dense. I know earlier I showed you when we had you read, some of you, we were all reading material that's not very, very difficult material. But when you have to read something very difficult, very dense, very technical, this is a process you should follow. We call this the IRIS reading method. And it's an acronym, as you can see here, but it's all about processing the information. It's better when you start general and then go for detail. So general, when you inspect the material, you're just getting, it's like seeing the forest, right? And then when you start reading, that's when you're zooming in to see the trees. And you get more detail here. You don't want to start with detail. It's better to start with the big picture. Have you ever heard that phrase, when you get caught up in details, you lose sight of the big picture? Well, if you start with the big picture, then reading is going to be a lot easier. What is going to happen if you get familiar with this material? Aren't you going to read it faster? Aren't you going to have better comprehension? Probably, right? Because most people, when they read, they don't do this. Most people, they just start here. And they just start on page number 1 of their chapter or the PDF that they're reading. And they just start reading. And if you don't know where you're going, then it's going to be hard to understand it. You're also going to have to go slower, right? Because you don't know what you're getting yourself into. So this is a process to follow anytime you are going to read technical material. But I also want you to know that sometimes you don't have to read something fully. Sometimes you just inspect the material, and that's it. So when I say that, it's in situations where you're just trying to get the general idea of the information. So let's say, let me go back here. Remember this article, India Skills Famine. What if I had this article and I had this article, but I also had 100 other articles about different countries, different topics, and I'm just trying to get the gist of the information. When I say the gist, I mean just the main points. I would if I had this article, I would read the first sentence of each paragraph, and then I would make a decision. Do I need to read this in its entirety? Now, in this case, I read this a while ago, but like in this case, I'd be like, yeah, I'm interested in this topic. Let me read it all for detail. But I start by reading the first sentence of each paragraph just to inspect the material. Now, sometimes I read the first sentence of each paragraph and I realize, you know what? This article is not worth my time. It all depends on my purpose, right? And this idea of inspecting information, this can save you a lot of time, because sometimes you inspect the information, you look at the headings, the subheadings, you read the introduction, conclusion, and you realize, you know what? I don't have to read this because maybe I already know enough about this topic. Let me move on to chapter 2, or let me move on to the next document that I need to read. So really, the idea is you inspect information. If it's worth reading, you read it and you get your detail. And then when you're done reading, you ask questions about what you just read, and then you figure out, how am I going to store this information? It's a very thorough process if you follow it this way. Now, like I said, in the next webinar on Thursday, we are going to cover memorization techniques, and I think you will find those to be incredibly helpful. I wish I learned these memorization techniques when I was going through my university studies, and again, it's better late than never. The memorization techniques we're going to cover on Thursday will also help you memorize other types of information. I don't know, maybe you have to memorize, what if you want to just remember people's names? Or for me, I do a lot of presentations. So I like to memorize my presentation before I give my presentation. Now, when I'm doing webinars, I also have slides, and that helps. But I want to make sure when I'm doing presentations that I'm not reading from like a script. So these techniques can help you memorize what you have to read, memorize a presentation, whatever. We're going to talk about improving your memory. So what about, just so you know, we're going to also have a follow-up course. I'll send you documents. When we're done on Thursday, I'll send you a follow-up course to this. Kind of like, all of you are going to get this recording so you can have it as a reference guide. But I also want to talk a little bit right now about speed drills. Earlier, you remember this last part of the acronym was STORE. This can also be a speed drill. Let me explain what I mean by that. So remember, we talked about how speed drills work. When you're doing speed drills, and I recommend you try doing these on your own, because we're not going to have time in the next webinar to do more speed drills because we'll focus on memory. But if you're doing these drills on your own, your goal is to see words at double your normal speed, so twice as fast. How do you do that? Let me explain. So the way the drills work, if you are an average reader, average reading speed is around 200, right? Your practice speed should be about double, 400. Remember, we were doing the speed drill and I was telling you to purposely push yourself, go faster than you would normally read. Well, if you're doing that and you're doing these speed drills at 400, if this is your normal speed, when I say normal, I mean your reading speed where you comprehend the material, this is like a skimming speed. You're going double. Why do we do this? So eventually, 250 doesn't feel that fast anymore. Now, if you're already reading at 250 or more, you should be practicing at double your normal reading speed so that eventually something like 300 feels comfortable. 300 is the speed where you're like, oh, I understand this well. Okay. And by the way, I should mention that your reading speed, it's not a single number. We all know this. It's more of a range. Sometimes you go faster, sometimes you go slower. It depends on the material you're reading, right? Technical material, you will always read that slower. Easy material, or something like, I don't know, if you're reading the news, you're going to read that faster than maybe a legal contract, right? But whatever speed you're at, if you're reading at 300 words per minute, you practice at 600. So 350 becomes the new normal. When I say new normal, again, the speed at which you're understanding. If you're at 350, you practice at 7, and so on and so forth. And this is a step-by-step kind of process to improving your reading speed. So if you want some unofficial homework, and I say unofficial because there's no way I can verify that you've done this, I would recommend doing these speed drills. You could do one later today if you want, but I recommend at the very minimum, try doing some speed drills. I would say 10 minutes each day. We have a webinar on Thursday, so I'd recommend 10 minutes tomorrow, 10 minutes the next day. I would actually recommend you do this for 2 weeks if you can spare the time. It's only 10 minutes a day, but how do you do this? All you have to do is, while you're reading something, let's say you're working on, I don't know, a certain book that you haven't read yet. You're on chapter 4 or chapter 5. Okay, first inspect your material, as we've been mentioning. Get familiar with it. Then read the material. But make sure you time yourself. How long is it taking you to finish this PDF or this chapter? Let's say it takes you 20 minutes. Okay, you time yourself and you realize, okay, it took me 20 minutes to finish the document or 20 minutes to finish the chapter. Now, of course, you're going to inquire, you're going to ask questions, but then this final step would be your speed drill. And this is where you would actually do an exercise. And if you read in 20 minutes the chapter, your speed drill should be 10 minutes, half the time, right? Remember, we said we want to shoot for a speed that's about double your normal reading speed. So these numbers can change. If this, let's say over here you were reading and it was not 20 minutes, but it was 12 minutes. So let's say you read for 12 minutes. Okay, then your speed drill is 6, right? So basically this is just half the time. You want to skim through what you've already read, and that's how you can actually implement this drill into this whole process here. But you're just skimming what you've already read. This actually enhances your comprehension and retention a little bit, but it also helps you focus on improving your speed. We only did a few drills today. And a lot of you, when I asked you earlier, how many of you made an improvement? I saw a lot of yeses in the chat box. Now, even if you didn't make an improvement, we only did a few drills today. What if you did a lot more drills? If you did 10 minutes a day for a couple of weeks, that would help you tremendously. So at this point, we are winding down the webinar. So if you have questions, feel free to start submitting them in the chat box. I will stick around. We'll have like a little Q&A section here. I'll also open it up to the organizers if Deshaun or anyone else needs to make any comments before we wrap up here. Just a quick summary of what we covered, and so you know what we're going to cover in the next webinar. We talked about how fast you read. We measured your speed. Now, we measured your reading speed in something, just material that wasn't very difficult. I would say it's medium level. When I say medium level, I see it's not advanced technical material, like, I don't know, an engineering textbook or a finance textbook or a legal document. But it's the material I showed you earlier. It was also not a children's book, right? If I gave you something very, very easy, like a kid's book, I'm sure all of you would read it faster. So again, your reading speed is a range. You might want to figure out your reading speed in more technical material. Whatever you're reading on a daily basis, measure your speed, figure out what it is. Read for a minute, count how many words you read. If it's a digital document, it's a little easier, right? You can just highlight the text that you read and figure out exactly how many words you read in 1 minute. But we also talked about improving your focus. That has a lot to do with using your hand or pen as a guide. We'll talk a little more about focus in the next webinar as well. We talked about improving comprehension. 2 major points here. 1, change up your speed. 2, inspect what you read. If you do that and you get familiar with your text, you'll have better comprehension because now I know what I'm getting myself into. Now, we also talked about reading faster on the computer screen. Don't forget about that accelerator program. And we talked about building up your speed with practice, so doing those speed drills. In the next webinar, and we're going to, by the way, you see this free follow-up course. This is going to be, I'll send you all a follow-up course access after we do Thursday's webinar. This will just have a little more detail, a little more, if you want to dive deeper into the topic of speed reading and also improving your memory. We will send everyone a link where you can actually access a follow-up course. This is for the CFA Society of Sri Lanka. And I want to thank everyone for attending today. I have my contact information on the screen right now. If you want to connect on LinkedIn, feel free to connect with me there. I've also got my contact information on the screen here. If you have questions later and you want to follow up, if you have questions, you can certainly submit them in the chat box right now. But if you have questions that pop up later on today or tomorrow or during the week or in the future, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. I want to thank everyone so much for attending. I also want to thank the organizers here. So Juanita, and apologies if I mispronounce anyone's name, Deshaun, Sandunika, thank you so much for inviting me to work with your group here. We've done this with a lot of CFA societies. We've done around 50 or so. But I want to thank everyone for attending. Hopefully in the future, we'll get a chance to meet if we can do this in person, or maybe in the future, some of you might come to Chicago, and I'm happy to give you any information if you need as a tourist of Chicago. I've lived here my whole life, but thank you all so much. If the organizers, any of you have to make any comments at the end, feel free to jump in and unmute your microphone. But otherwise, thank you all for attending, and have a great evening. Have a great rest of the week. Take care.
Thanks, Paul. That was very insightful, and I think we learned a lot. We can take a few questions at this point. So if you have any questions, you can put it in the chat box, and Paul will be happy to answer them.
I did see a message that was sent to me privately asking a question about subvocalization. So earlier, I was talking about this habit of subvocalization. I'll just bring it up back on the slide here. It's towards the beginning of the webinar. And this habit of saying words in your head. Somebody asked, like, how do I get rid of this voice in my head? I want everyone to know that you won't get rid of it completely, but you can minimize it. So subvocalization, that's, again, that voice you hear in your head while you're reading. All the research I've looked at shows you can't eliminate this habit, but you can reduce subvocalization. So let me just explain what I mean here. When I'm reading, I still say words in my head, but I don't say every single word in my head. So if I was reading a sentence like, the boy jumped over the fence. Okay, so the boy jumped over the fence. In my head, I might just say, boy jumped fence. That's it. Same idea comes across. Now, I'm not skipping words. What's going on here is I'm just not saying all the words. Now, when I'm reading, I'm not saying them out loud. You know, I'm saying the words in my head, but I'm not saying every word in my head. So that's what we mean by reducing subvocalization. So how do we reduce subvocalization is really the question. I know, and it's a very common question that we get. People ask, how do I get rid of this habit? How do I get rid of that voice in my head? You'll never get rid of it. You want to decrease it. How do you know you're decreasing it? Well, remember we measured your reading speed? We measured it a couple times today. If you were reading anywhere above 300 words per minute, so when we measured your speed the first time or the second time, if you were over 300 words per minute, that means you're not saying all the words in your head. You're saying some, but not all of them. So what I mean by that is really, you can't talk. If you were reading at 350 words per minute, you can't talk that fast. So that voice in your head, it might still be going, but you're not saying each and every single word. So, so you could also use another way to decrease subvocalization is try utilizing that accelerator program. And if you use that program, if you're going anywhere above 300 words per minute, let's say we're going 350, you can't say the words this fast. It's just not possible to talk that fast. So if you change, you can use this program as a means, you can use this as a training tool to decrease that subvocalization habit. So again, thanks for the question. Again, feel free to submit any other questions in the chat box. And if there are no other questions, I'll sign off in a little bit, but thank you all. Again, Deshaun, thank you for organizing this.
Yes, thanks, Paul. So if there are no further questions, as Paul has given his contact details, so you can get in touch with him after this session. So thanks, Paul. Thanks for your time and the insights, and we hope to see you again on Thursday, and all of you present attending as well. So we hope to see you on Thursday for another webinar just like this, focused on memory and increasing your memory. So look forward to that. And thank you for joining in today.
Thank you. Thanks for
Thank you.
organizing.
Bye.
Bye.